Fine Music Breakfast with Annabelle Drumm.
And I hope you're enjoying your Fine Music Breakfast here at Fine Music 102.5. I'm Annabelle Drumm, and I'm here in the studio with Bill Henson. We'll be able to talk to him very shortly. Just first of all, though, the weather. Currently it is 12 degrees in Sydney, and we're looking for a high of 23. And in Penrith, it's 10 degrees. It's warmed up a little bit already. And they're looking for a high of 24. It'll be sunny all day. We've got a little bit of fog possibly out in the west and just some light winds. Similar day tomorrow. Another beautiful day, tomorrow being Saturday. Now, I have my very special guest with me here in the studio, one of Australia's most revered artist photographers. His work has been purchased for every major public collection in Australia, as well as for collections in Los Angeles, New York, Montreal, Vienna, Madrid, the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris, and the Tate Gallery in London. And his appreciation of art as a whole extends well beyond photography to sculpture, painting, gardens, music, books, and dance. I'm sure a lot more. I'd like to welcome to Fine Music, Bill Henson.
Thank you, Annabelle.
I love hearing about your appreciation of all these different styles of music and art. Is there like a common thread that runs through it as to what it is that attracts you?
Well, yes, I think I have to state the obvious: beauty.
Beauty.
Yes, it's a thing which perhaps a little trite. I like to say that, you know, the universe runs on attraction, from two molecules in a vacuum all the way up to an episode of Hollywood Housewives, and so it's what attracts us, I think, and particularly as a visual artist, it's what attracts the eye. It's what interests the eye. So, and that of course applies to gardening as much as it does to painting or sculpture and so forth. And
though if beauty's in the eye of the beholder, then there must be different things that people are attracted to as to what they think beauty is.
Of course. Well, that's one of the great gifts of art to civilization. It reinforces the priority of individual experience. It sends us back into ourselves because, well, let's face it, there's no correct way of listening to Mozart and there's no correct way of looking at Rembrandt. There's only your way. It can be more or less well informed in detail, but it's the individual journey we all go on.
And the emotional response, I suppose, isn't it?
Yes. Well, I think it starts that way. It was the great Robert Hughes who sort of popularised that statement of fact that meaning comes from feeling, not the other way around. Of course, if we don't feel anything much, it's never going to mean much to us. So, yes, it starts with feeling. And I have a wonderful documentary about the great conductor Carlos Kleiber, and one of his musicians from the Bayerische Rundfunk actually is saying, you know, he was a conductor of deep emotionality, you know. And I think that is where things start.
Yeah, it sounds like a good place to start. If we look at your career and how that started as well, you seem to have got off to a running start. You got your first solo exhibition as a teenager, was that right?
Correct.
And now it's just expanded to the point where there's just huge demand for your work all around the world. Do you think there was like a particular point where, like a turning point, where suddenly the demand really escalated?
Not so much. I mean, I think it's been a gradual thing, and it was a big surprise to me when the lecturer at my art school, you know, marched into the room and sort of said, you know, "Oh, Bill's been given a show at the National Gallery Victoria," and I think there was a kind of a mixture of kind of horror and sort of like gasping on the part of my fellow students. Years later, dear Athol Smith, who was my lecturer, and John Cater, the two lecturers there, were sort of saying, "Oh, we don't know that was such a good idea," sort of, you know.
Now look at him. Now.
Yeah, well, yeah, but still, it's interesting because once a work leaves the studio, it has its own trajectory. Out it goes into the world, and its public trajectory is something that I'm really only at the periphery of, because people have a relationship with the pictures you make if there's an interest there, and it can be an intense relationship sometimes, but it's the journey once again that they're going on, and I'm somewhat at the periphery of that. So the work assumes a sort of a life of its own.
So does their journey affect how you develop your work from there forward in the future?
No, well, I wouldn't say that. I mean, obviously, as it goes, no one's an island, so we're all entirely a product of our place and time. But I don't consciously anticipate the audience when I'm working. I work alone. I don't have assistants. I'm in my studio most of the time, slumped in a chair, looking at a picture and thinking to myself, I don't buy it. And so it's just the fact that when you're working, you have, of course, complete freedom, but you also have total responsibility. And as an artist, you can't defer to a panel of experts. Don't worry, this picture's wonderful. So that's okay. Go out and have a cup of tea. You can't lie to yourself. And so you just have to work through this process. And when work is not going well, of course, you feel like a fool and hopeless. And when a picture is going very well, it feels as though the picture's making itself and you're along for the ride. But it's only when the pictures leave the studio when I feel that there's nothing more I can do. It's a definition I had to develop for speaking to school children when they say, great questions kids have. How do you know when something's finished? And I worked out the best way to explain it was to say, when it's still interesting to me, but there's nothing more I can do about it. So when pictures reach that point, I'm happy to let them out of the studio. But how people are going to react to them, what is going to happen to the press or whatever else, I can't say, and I wouldn't want to control, of course.
And the style of the work that you're doing as well is fascinating me. It very much reminded me of I think it was Caravaggio, who from a much earlier time, a painter who had very dark and it's not high contrast, is it? It's just mostly dark, and so the light is so it really draws you into the painting, and that's what reminded me of your photographs.
Well, they sometimes talk about it as a whole school, a Caravaggio-esque school, but for me, a different thing. I mean, a photograph is a very different thing from a painting, and I love painting. I'm more interested in painting generally, especially the history of it, compared to the history of photography. But I'm more interested in painting than photography generally, and I'm more interested in music and literature than I am in photography generally. So I think of myself as someone who makes things, objects, which happen to be photographs. But with that in mind, there is something that, although no medium is more or less intrinsically limited, it's what a person does with it that counts. There is something about photography. It is in some way the most profoundly contradictory of mediums, because we come conditioned to it, to see it as proof of something. The evidential authority precedes any individual reading of a picture. There it is, objects in space, events in time, ringing proof. And we don't approach the theatre or a work of fiction, a novel or music in that way. It's an imaginative journey that we're going to be taken on, and that's what we expect, and that's what happens. So the big challenge is with photography to hang on to that dumb veracity, that literalness of the photograph. There it is, a teacup sitting on a table. It's that prescriptive dimension, if you like, and somehow also universalise the subject, introduce some hint of the abstract, take it into an area where it then becomes what I would consider art, so that you become much more suggestive while retaining the information, the precise information that photographs do. Now, the blackness and the shadows are one of the ways in which you can introduce space and uncertainty and ambiguity into a picture. So you have the detail of someone's skin, or the detail of the texture of a mountainside or something, but then there's the shadow. And it's often what goes missing in the shadows that animates the speculative capacity.
I found that very much when I was looking at the pictures, that if it's a face or a body, it's not the object that you're looking at anymore. It's the shape that the shadow makes, or the shape that the light makes on it.
Yes, and that sense of how that body inhabits the space. And that's one of the things that interests me the most, and how you also suggest that sort of unstable world of all sentient beings. You have this
Where's the
surface.
borderline?
Yeah, you have this surface of skin where you end and the rest of the world begins, or the rest of the universe begins. And so it interests me greatly to try and to almost destabilise that in some way. So the tones that you use, the layering up of film grain, and the work you do on the print is very, very important, because you can introduce a certain a seeming translucency, so the light seems to penetrate the form, much as we notice if we look carefully at some marble sculpture, you see the light penetrating the form, and it suggests this kind of uncertain point at where the individual ends and the universal begin.
And you love your music as well. This is something that is interesting to us, of course. So do you listen to music while you're working?
I never listen to music when I'm using a camera, especially if I'm working with a model.
But when you're by yourself?
When I'm by myself in the studio, which is 99% of the time, sitting in a chair working on my pictures, yes. Listening to music for me is a very deliberate thing. I don't have background music, and it often takes me a long time to find exactly what I need. And it will be a particular performance with a particular conductor or musician, and once that's in place, sometimes I'll listen to it hundreds of times. I've been going through those late Abbado recordings from the Lucerne Festival that he did with the Festival Orchestra and with the Berlin Phil, of course. Those Mahler symphonies with incredible space in them. And
you've chosen some Mahler today as well.
Yes.
So tell us about the one that you've chosen. This is with Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau.
Well, we were thinking of something that we could just play in one piece rather than taking a chunk out of the exquisite sort of endless Mahler Ninth Symphony, and so it's just a very beautiful song, and the balance in this song between this world and the next, that whole sense that Mahler gets of the sort of fragility of life, and this thing being, if you like, it's a cardinal quality for me in great art, the sense of it being just inside the physical world, where you or I can see it, touch it, or hear it. There's a lot of that in Mahler's songs.
Well, let's enjoy it then with you. This is Dietrich Fischer-Dieskau with Daniel Barenboim accompanying.
Ging heut Morgen übers Feld, sah auf den Gräsern hin, sprach zu mir der lustige Fink, ei du Geld. Immer blühen kann.
Very beautiful little piece there from Songs of the Wayfarer, as you said, and switching between different feelings and emotions within there as well.
Yes. It's one of the great things, one of the great gifts of Mahler, this ability to slide from something that seems kind of energetic and muscular and confident. There are all those marches and things, and suddenly the ground falls out from underneath you, and this sort of eerie dreamscape in the music. It's wonderful stuff.
Now, looking at the subjects of your work over many years, you often love bodies, working with bodies and landscapes, sometimes cityscapes. What sort of content can visitors expect from this exhibition that's just starting tonight in Sydney?
Well, really, you can divide the whole history of the visual arts into the face, the figure, and the landscape, and various combinations, with a few historical exceptions like Islamic art and so forth. And that's what visual artists work with, and that's what they'll see in the exhibition.
So it's a mix of them.
Yes,
this time
it's a
around?
mix. There are landscapes that I've made. There's the work there, with perhaps one or two exceptions, has never been exhibited before, so it's never been seen anywhere outside my studio. There are landscapes for the most part made in Italy in the last 6 to 7 years, but none of them have been seen before, I think. And
how long were you in Italy?
Oh, I go back and forth. I get an idea and I say, oh dear, I have to go to the Aeolian Islands because I can't get this image of Stromboli, the volcano, out of my mind, and so I'll fly over there and spend a week going round and round and round Stromboli.
Studying the volcano.
In a chopper. It's a rather expensive photograph to make as a result. Or, you turn a corner in your street and see someone that you want to photograph, and it's a much more simple operation. But the body and the face in space, basically, 10 years ago, someone was saying to me, how have these changed since you last showed, or in Sydney, let's say. I said, well, the people in the pictures, you had a context. They were in an environment, a nightscape, a cityscape. There were lights. There was a sense of the landscape around the people. That's disappeared. All of the work in recent years now is just these figures and faces, and they're in total blackness. There's nothing around them. So,
is that where the boundaries disappear for you? Do you think?
Well,
that's
they've become formally more reductive in a funny kind of way. But I wouldn't anticipate other people's responses. But I don't think that there's any reduction in the emotional intensity. For certainly the experience of making things.
Well, it's
just
more the essence of it is what I saw when I was looking into it.
Yes,
more concentrated.
So that's right. And so the landscapes and the individuals are really in separate images now. But they do complement each other. And because new work for me grows out of old work, when you place a landscape, a particular landscape next to a particular image of a body or a face, it suggests a third thing. It's like this conversation opens up between these two works next to each other on a wall, sometimes across a space. And these unforeseen conversations open up and suggest things to you.
Wonderful. Well, this is what we can see tonight. So the exhibition opens tonight at the Roslyn Oxley 9 Gallery, which is in Paddington, and it opens at 6 p.m. There'll be the big fancy opening, I suppose.
I think it might be a bit crowded, yes.
It'll be a bit crowded, and then it'll be open until the 8th of June. The exhibition runs till the 8th of June.
Saturday.
Also, tomorrow there's a talk. Are you doing a talk at 3 p.m.?
Yes, for my sins. I'm giving the artist's talk tomorrow at 3 o'clock.
And that's open to the public as well?
It's open to the public,
Wonderful.
Of course, yes.
That'll be great. And then also on Wednesday and Thursday next week, the Sydney Art Quartet will be performing Chiaroscuro, so which is the art style.
The light and dark that you were talking about with Caravaggio, yes.
So is that the name of the program? Or
I think that's
is it
the name
piece
of their
music?
program.
Okay.
And they'll be playing Arvo Pärt and a few other people.
Wonderful. So that's Wednesday and Thursday next week at 7 p.m. They'll be in the
space.
gallery, right? So we'll put some more details up on the website if you're interested in going along to see Bill Henson's art exhibition, which starts tonight at 6 p.m. Thank you so much for joining me today, Bill.
Pleasure, Annabelle.
Lovely to have you here.
Thank you.